A homeless father buys an abandoned house for just $20. But what he and his son find inside will change everything. Watch till the end. You won't believe what happens when the house begins to breathe. Subscribe for more incredible stories and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The road wound through the Oregon mountains like a scar carved into the land, fading in and out of mist. The air was heavy with the smell of wet pine and rusted metal as Tom Weaver guided his battered van through the fog. The wipers screeched across the windshield, pushing aside thin ribbons of moisture that refused to leave. In the back seat, Eli, his 8-year-old son, slept under a patched blanket, his hand wrapped tightly around a chipped red toy truck. Tom's hands were locked on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale. The road ahead was cracked and narrow, a forgotten stretch that hadn't seen a repair crew in years. He wasn't sure whether he was running away or toward something, only that he couldn't let his son spend another night behind the dumpster at the gas station off Route 9. The van coughed, rattled, and stuttered up the incline. Tom gave it a reassuring pat on the dashboard. "Just a little farther, old girl," he murmured. The fuel gauge sat well below empty, the needle trembling like it was afraid to fall. As they rounded a bend, something caught his eye. A hand-painted sign leaning crookedly against a post. County Foreclosure Auction, Lake Hollow, minimum bid, $20. He almost laughed. $20. Less than what people dropped into his coffee cup out of pity. Less than the cost of 2 hot meals. But there was something about the word hollow that made him ease off the gas. A hollow was a place that waited. He slowed the van, glanced in the rearview mirror at Eli's sleeping face, and whispered, "Maybe that's the sign I've been waiting for." By the time they reached the clearing, the sun was sliding down behind the ridges, staining the mist gold and violet. The auction was nothing more than 2 county officials at a folding table, their breath steaming in the chill. One of them looked up from a clipboard. "You here for the Lake Hollow property?" Tom nodded, his voice rough. "How much land are we talking?" "A few acres. Cabin's still standing, far as we know," the official said. "No power, no plumbing, no guarantees." Tom felt the last $24 in his pocket like a brand against his leg. When bidding began, no one else spoke. $20, he said quietly. The man blinked, surprised, but scribbled on the clipboard anyway. "Sold," he said after a pause. Just like that, Tom Weaver owned a home. He expected a laugh, maybe a pitying smile, but the men simply handed him a rusted key tied to a strip of torn leather and a folded map. "Good luck," one of them muttered. Tom stood by the van, turning the key over in his hand. It felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of years. He hadn't held a house key since the bank took their home 2 years ago. The van's engine rumbled to life again, echoing off the trees. Eli stirred in the back seat, blinking sleepily. "Did we find a place, Dad?" he asked. Tom looked at him through the rearview mirror, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, kid," he said softly. "We just bought ourselves a house." The road to Lake Hollow narrowed into gravel, lined with skeletal birch and dripping pine. The forest thickened until it seemed to swallow the world whole. When they finally reached the lake, twilight had already descended. The water stretched smooth and still, reflecting the sky like a bruise. Across the lake stood a small stone house, half buried in the hillside, a sagging porch and a crooked chimney, leaning as if tired of standing. It looked like it had been waiting for someone. Tom parked by the shore and shut off the engine. The silence that followed was deep and heavy, the kind of quiet that asked to be trusted. They crossed a narrow wooden bridge, every board creaking beneath their feet. The sign above the door was almost unreadable, but Tom traced the faded letters with his fingertips. Hollow Rest. Rest, he whispered. That's all we need. The key turned stiffly in the lock, and the door opened with a sigh, as though the house itself were exhaling. Dust motes drifted in the lantern light, swirling like old ghosts. Inside was one large room, a table, 2 chairs, a fireplace blackened with soot. The floorboards creaked but held firm. Eli ran a hand across the dusty table. It's old, he said softly. So am I, Tom replied, and for the first time in months, both of them laughed. They worked in silence for a while. Tom swept the floor while Eli gathered dry branches from outside. When the first fire caught in the hearth, the warmth spread through the room like a heartbeat returning to a tired body. They ate canned beans by firelight, their shadows dancing along the stone walls. Eli leaned against his father's shoulder, his voice drowsy. Do we get to stay here? Tom hesitated. The roof might leak, the walls might crumble, the whole place might fall before dawn. But he didn't say that. He kissed his son's hair and whispered, Yeah, Eli, this is home now. Outside, the lake shimmered faintly under the rising moon. The air was still, but a single ripple moved across the surface, spreading slowly toward the shore. Tom noticed it through the window, his brow furrowing. There was no wind. He watched until it disappeared, then looked back at the fire. The flames crackled softly, steady and alive. For the first time in years, the silence didn't scare him. It felt like a beginning. Small, fragile, but real. He lay beside his son, the warmth of the fire fading into dreams, and as he drifted off, he thought he heard something deep beneath the house. Not quite a sound, not quite a feeling. A low hum, steady as a heartbeat, keeping time with their breathing. By morning, the fog sat low on Lake Hollow like a sheet of glass. The world outside was pale and quiet, but inside the stone house, the air felt different, less abandoned, less cold. Tom woke before Eli and lay still for a moment, listening. There it was again. A low vibration, somewhere under the floor. Not the creak of settling wood or the rattle of loose stone. Deeper, slower, rhythmic, almost like a pulse. He pressed his palm to the floor beside the hearth. Warm. That didn't make sense. The fire had burned down to embers hours ago, and this place had no heat except what they made for themselves. But still, the stone itself felt warm to the touch, and the warmth wasn't fading. Tom rubbed his face and exhaled. You're just tired, he muttered to himself. You're hearing things because you want to. He'd been in enough bad places to know that sometimes hope tricks you harder than fear ever did. Eli sat up under the blanket, hair sticking out in every direction, eyes half open. Is it morning? He mumbled. Close enough, Tom said. You hungry? Eli nodded, and Tom smiled. Hunger he could handle. Hunger was simple. Hunger meant another day alive. Breakfast was canned corn heated in the same dented pot they'd used last night, eaten with spoons gone slightly soft at the edges. Eli didn't complain. Eli almost never complained. Tom both loved him and hated that about him. After they ate, Tom started looking at the place in daylight. The house had been built half into the hillside, the back wall sunk into earth, the front looking out over the lake. The walls weren't drywall or paneling. They were stone, real stone. Hand-laid, uneven, some pieces dark with age, some split and veined like old bone. Moss had crept in along the edges of the window frame. The chimney leaned. The roof sagged in one corner where rain had chewed through the shingles and left a brown stain in the ceiling. It should have felt ruined. It didn't. What it felt like, And Tom wasn't sure he liked that he even had this thought, was tired. Like something that had been waiting too long and was just now starting to wake up. He found an old broom in what passed for a corner closet and started pushing dust toward the door. Eli followed him with a tin bucket and collected fallen twigs, pine needles, and scraps of paper from the floor. At one point, Eli stopped sweeping and pressed his ear to the wall. "Don't lean on that too hard," Tom said automatically. "If that comes down, I can't put it back up." "I'm listening." "To what? Mice?" Eli frowned. "It's humming." Tom huffed out a laugh. "That's called silence, buddy. You're not used to it." But later, when Eli wasn't looking, Tom did the same thing. He pressed the side of his head to the stone near the old fireplace. He held his breath. There it was, a steady hum, not loud, not angry, just present, like the low sound you get when you rest your head against someone's chest and feel them breathing. That sound reached down into something in him that hadn't been touched in a long time. He pulled back fast. No, he wasn't doing this. He wasn't about to sit here and start pretending rocks cared. The place was drafty, fragile, and probably one strong storm away from falling in on them. That was real. That was what he needed to pay attention to. He could not afford to get sentimental about a house. Around midday, he decided to check the fireplace in case there was a blockage. A chimney fire was the last thing they needed. He got down on his knees and reached into the ash. His fingers brushed wood, not firewood, something smooth. He dug around and pulled out a small wooden box, blackened with soot and wrapped with a cracked leather strap that snapped as soon as he touched it. "What's that?" Eli asked, instantly at his side. "I don't know yet," Tom said. He set the box on the table and opened it. Inside were neatly folded papers, browned and curling at the edges. Receipts, a few letters, ink faded to the color of old tea, and tucked beneath them a photograph. The photo showed a man standing at the edge of the same lake outside their window. He was middle-aged, heavy coat, work boots, hair wild around his ears. He wasn't posing like people do when they're forced to. He looked proud, like someone looking at his life and deciding it was enough. On the back of the photo, in handwriting firm enough to belong to someone who didn't apologize for taking up space, were the words, "To whoever finds this, take care of this place. It remembers kindness." Eli leaned close. "Who is that?" Tom stared at the photograph for a long time. "Maybe the man who lived here before us." "Is he dead?" Tom swallowed. "Probably." There was something about the way the message was written. Not dramatic, not desperate, just honest. The kind of words you leave behind when you know no one is coming to pick up after you. "It remembers kindness," Eli repeated softly, like it was a line from a bedtime story. "People put sayings like that on signs to sell at gift shops," Tom said, forcing a smile. "Doesn't mean anything." But he slipped the photo into his jacket pocket anyway. They worked for hours. Tom patched a draft near the back window with pieces of cardboard and duct tape from the van. He found a loose nail in the door frame, hammered it back in with the bottom of his flashlight. He took off his own jacket and stuffed it into a gap under the door because the wind crawled in from the floor. Eli dragged in armfuls of fallen branches from the tree line and stacked them carefully by size. Big logs, middle sticks, little kindling. Then he pulled a chair next to the window and watched the lake like it was a TV screen. "What are you looking for?" Tom asked. "The lake dreams," Eli said without looking away. Tom paused mid-swing with the hammer. "The what?" "Last night I saw lights under the water, little blue ones. They moved slow like they were thinking. That's how you know something's dreaming. It moves slow." Tom had 1,000 answers for that. All of them sensible, all the things a responsible parent is supposed to say. Instead, he said, "Yeah? What's it dreaming about? Who it used to love?" Tom forced himself to go back to the hinge he was fixing. He didn't want Eli to see his face, because for just a moment, he let himself believe it. Just for a moment. That night, after they ate and cleaned out what dishes they had with melted lake water, Eli sat cross-legged by the fire. The light from the flames made his hair look copper at the edges, his face soft and calm. "Dad," he said quietly. Tom was mending his bootlace with shaking fingers he pretended weren't shaking. "Yeah? Can I ask something and you promise not to get sad?" Tom froze. "Ask it. Do you think Mom would like it here?" Tom swallowed hard. There it was. The weight that followed him everywhere. He saw her sometimes when he wasn't ready, not in dreams, but in flashes. Her hand on the back of his neck, her voice telling him to breathe. Her laugh, sharp and bright and mean only to the people who deserved it. Back when they still had a couch and a kitchen and weekends that meant something. He could not break down in front of his son. That was a rule. So he cleared his throat and answered like it was easy. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, Eli. She'd say the porch needs work and the roof is a problem, and then she'd sit right there with you by that fire and steal your blanket." Eli smiled, satisfied. "Yeah," he whispered. "That sounds like her." They were quiet for a while. The fire hissed and popped. Outside, Lake Hollow lay perfectly still. Then Eli frowned and leaned toward the nearest window. "Dad? Did you write that?" "Write what?" Eli pointed. Tom stood, knees aching, and crossed the room. At first, he didn't see anything. Then, as he got closer to the glass, he noticed the faint fogged-over surface from their breath and the heat of the fire against the cold night air. 3 words had formed in the condensation. "You are safe." Tom stared. His first instinct was to assume Eli had done it with his finger. Of course he had. That was obvious. That was normal. That was reality. Except the message wasn't written in finger lines. It wasn't streaked. It didn't look traced. It looked like the moisture itself had arranged in clean, perfect edges. And Eli was looking up at him with wide, serious eyes. "I didn't," Eli whispered. "Promise." Tom opened his mouth, closed it again. He wiped the window with the sleeve of his shirt until the words disappeared. "There," he said. "See? It's nothing." Eli didn't argue. He went back to sit by the fire, shoulders small and trusting. Tom stayed at the window longer than he needed to, because after a minute and 20 seconds, the words came back. Same place, same shape. You are safe. He watched his own faint reflection in the glass. Tired eyes, uneven stubble, jaw clenched too tight for too many days, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something close to shame. He'd brought his kid to sleep behind dumpsters and in parking lots and on floors that smelled like bleach and old cigarettes. He'd gone hungry so that Eli wouldn't. He'd told himself that was enough, that surviving was the same thing as protecting. And now a house, a broken, leaking, half-forgotten house, was doing it better. He cleared his throat and said, very quietly, to nobody, "Thank you." The hum under the floor got just a little stronger. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. They woke with the gray light. Tom checked the roof and gathered what lumber he could pry loose from the leaning shed out back. He cleaned the gutters with his bare hands, pulling out wads of rotted leaves. He hammered sheet metal over the softest part of the ceiling, a temporary patch against the next rain. He fixed what he could fix and made notes in his head about what he couldn't. Work made him feel steady. Work had always made him feel steady. Eli built things. He stacked flat rocks from the shore into little towers along the water's edge, then sat and watched them, like they might answer back. He drew in the dirt with a stick, the lake, the house, a lopsided version of Tom. He talked to the fireplace in a low murmur like it was a pet. One afternoon he asked, "Can I paint the door?" Tom didn't even look up from the board he was planning. "With what?" "I found a can in the shed. It's blue." "Is it sealed?" "Mostly." Tom exhaled. "If that paint still moves when you shake it, you can paint whatever you want." Eli grinned. By sunset, the old front door, a door that had probably been gray for 20 years, was an uneven but undeniable shade of faded blue. Eli added a crooked yellow sun in the bottom corner. Tom stood with his arms folded across his chest, pretending to evaluate it critically. "It's good," he said. Eli beamed. "Now it looks like somebody lives here." Tom didn't answer right away, because that line hit too hard. That night, after dinner, after Eli fell asleep in front of the fire with his arm tucked under his face, Tom sat alone at the table and pulled the photograph back out of his jacket. He studied the man's face. Weathered, calm, not defeated, not bitter. A person who'd worked his whole life and still had something left that hadn't been taken. "Who were you?" Tom asked under his breath. The fire shifted softly. The humming in the floor stayed low and steady, almost soothing. Tom flipped the photo over and read the message again. "This house remembers kindness." The words bothered him, but not in a bad way. They bothered him the way your own name does when you haven't heard it spoken with respect in a long time. "It's just a place," he whispered. "You know that. It's just stone. It's just luck." But his throat was tight, because the truth was, he didn't feel like luck had walked in with him. He felt like he'd walked into something that had been waiting. Near midnight, a wind rolled across Lake Hollow hard enough to rattle the window panes. The fire guttered low. Tom threw on 2 more sticks. The flames licked up, blue for just a second before sliding back to orange. Blue. He frowned. Wood smoke doesn't burn blue. He stared into the fire until his eyes stung. The logs shifted, settled. For a heartbeat, the room glowed soft and cold like moonlight. Then it was gone. "Okay," he whispered. "That's new." Eli stirred sleepily. "It's purring," he mumbled without opening his eyes. Tom turned. "What is?" "The house," Eli said, voice thick with dream. "It's happy we're here." Tom sat back against the chair and let that wash over him. He could argue with paperwork. He could argue with banks. He could argue with sheriff's deputies and property lines and every person who ever told him some variation of, "You don't belong here." He could not argue with that. The hum continued, steady and gentle like a heartbeat under the floor. For the first time in a long time, Tom let his shoulders drop. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He kept his voice low. "We're staying," he whispered to the house. "Hear me?" The hum didn't change. It didn't need to. He understood. They were no longer passing through. They were home. The days at Lake Hollow fell into a rhythm. Tom patched what he could with scrap wood, bent nails, and stubbornness. Eli kept building his stone towers by the lake and talking to the house like it was listening, which, if Tom was being honest, it sometimes felt like it was. The blue-painted door gleamed in the sunlight, and the crooked yellow sun Eli had painted beside it had become their little emblem of survival. One afternoon, while Tom was reinforcing the porch railing, a truck rumbled across the old wooden bridge. It was newer than anything that belonged on that road, shiny, silver, loud. The engine idled with authority before the driver cut it. A man stepped out. Mid-40s, clean boots, expensive jacket, a smile sharp enough to belong in a boardroom. "Mr. Weaver?" the man called out. Tom set down his hammer but didn't move closer. "Who's asking?" "Grant Ellison. I represent a few property investors in the county." Grant offered a hand he didn't expect Tom to take. "I hear you've taken over Hollow Rest." Tom glanced at the house, its roof patched with tin and its windows glinting faintly in the light. "Bought it, fair and square," he said. "County auction." Grant nodded slowly, eyes sweeping the porch, the chimney, the painted door. "You got a good deal. Some might say too good." He pulled a folded envelope from his coat pocket. "You're aware there are 3 years of unpaid property taxes attached to this lot?" Tom's stomach tightened. Auction notice said clear title. Grant smiled, a practiced smile. "Technically, yes. But legally, well, things are rarely simple. The county can reopen delinquent files any time before final recording. My client's prepared to pay those taxes and take ownership off your hands. In exchange, you'd receive a generous finder's fee. Cash." He said the last word like it meant salvation. Tom looked toward the lake. The water was still, glassy. The reflection of the clouds shifted slowly like they were listening. "I'm not selling," he said. Grant's tone stayed friendly, but his eyes hardened. "Sometimes it's smarter to let go early, before things get complicated." Eli appeared in the doorway, paint smudged on his cheek. He stood silent, watching. Grant followed Tom's glance toward the boy and softened his voice. "You've got a kid. You don't want this turning into a legal mess." Tom's jaw tightened. "We're fine here." Grant handed him a card anyway. "Think about it. My number's on the back." He turned, boots crunching against gravel. "You can make a life anywhere, Mr. Weaver. Some places just don't want to be lived in." The truck rolled away across the bridge, leaving dust and silence. Eli came down the steps slowly. "Dad, is he going to take it?" Tom stared at the card in his hand. The paper was thick, smooth, heavy. He could feel the weight of everything it offered and everything it threatened. He can't take what's already ours. That night, Tom threw the card into the fire. The flames flared blue again, brighter this time, almost alive. He didn't tell Eli about the taxes. He didn't want to see the fear in his son's eyes again. Instead, he wrote a list in the back of an old notebook. Roof, window frames, wood supply, plan for taxes. He circled the last one 3 times. The next morning, the fog was thick enough to blur the edge of the lake. When Tom stepped outside, the hum in the walls followed him, low and steady like a heartbeat keeping time with his own. He went into town. The market bell rang as he pushed open the door. Behind the counter stood May Caldwell, a gray-haired woman in a green jacket and work boots, eyes bright and curious. "You must be the man from Hollow Rest," she said. "Half the town's been guessing when someone had finally claimed that place." "Guess that's me," Tom said. May smiled. "Guess it is. You fixing it up?" "Trying." "Well, trying's more than most folks do," she said. Then, seeing the tension in his shoulders, she added, "You got trouble already, don't you?" Tom hesitated. "Maybe." She nodded knowingly. "Grant Ellison stopped by here yesterday, asking who bought the property. He's been sniffing around those lakes for years, hoping for a cheap miracle. Man doesn't know how to leave sleeping ghosts alone." Tom exhaled. "He says there are back taxes." "There are," May admitted, "but nothing that can't be worked out. The county likes money better than drama." She scribbled on a notepad, tearing off a sheet. "You come see me tomorrow. I'll help you put together a payment plan. You just keep doing what you're doing out there." Tom accepted the paper like it was a lifeline. When he returned home, Eli was sitting by the lake, building a crescent-shaped wall of stones. "It's for the house," he said when Tom asked, "so it doesn't get lonely." Tom smiled faintly. "That's kind of you." Eli looked serious. "The house is kind to us." That night, thunder crawled across the horizon. The air turned sharp and metallic. Tom bolted the door and checked the roof patches. The first drops hit like pebbles, then came the downpour. Lightning split the sky, and for a moment the room glowed with a faint blue shimmer, the same light he'd seen in the fire, now running through the stones in the wall like veins. Eli pressed his ear to the floor. "It's louder," he whispered. Tom crouched beside him. The hum had changed pitch, lower and fuller, vibrating up through the soles of his boots. It wasn't fear he felt. It was something older, something protective. He whispered into the air, unsure if he was talking to himself or the house. "Hold on." The storm raged through the night, but the walls didn't shake. The roof held, the floor stayed dry. When the thunder finally rolled away, Tom realized his shoulders had dropped. The next morning, sunlight broke through a thin curtain of mist. The blue door gleamed brighter than before, and the hum had quieted to a soft purr. On the window, drawn in faint condensation, new words had appeared. "We're glad you stayed." Tom stood staring at it for a long time, his throat tight. He didn't know if houses could feel gratitude, but as the light hit the lake and ripples spread like a slow heartbeat across the surface, he decided it didn't matter. Whatever this place was, ghost, memory, or miracle, it wanted them here. And that was enough to fight for. Winter did not arrive like a crash. It settled in quietly, the way tired men sit down after a long day and just stay. The air thinned, sharpened. Frost drew pale veins along the porch railing. Lake Hollow slowed. By the second week of cold, the gravel road into town had iced over. The van wouldn't have made that drive even if Tom had tried. May still sent food, but now it came by way of a local hunter who left brown paper bags on the bridge and waved from a distance, like people used to do for folks grieving. Tom always waved back. Inside the house, they did what people without money always do when cold comes. They rationed. Wood, food, light, worry. Tom watched every log that went into the fire like each one was a dollar bill. At night, when Eli fell asleep, Tom would wait 10, 15 minutes, then quietly let the fire get smaller, holding their heat in blankets and silence. The cold had a sound in the house. It lived in the corners. It sat in the walls. You could hear it, but it never touched the floor. The stone around the hearth stayed warm, even on the mornings when Tom's breath smoked in front of his face. He didn't understand it. He had stopped pretending he did. "Dad," Eli said one morning, sitting cross-legged near the fire with his chin tucked into his knees, "do you think the house can get sick?" Tom looked up from the ledger May had given him. He'd started keeping notes in the back of it. Not money. Not anymore. Something else. Changes, sounds, heat, rhythm. "Why?" he asked. "'Cause it sounds tired." Tom listened. He heard it immediately. The hum had changed. It had always been steady before, low, even, patient, almost like the slow beat of a heart resting. Now it felt different. He could feel it through the soles of his boots, through the floorboards, through the stone itself. It was still there, still present, but restless, uneven, like whatever lived under the floor was fighting to keep its balance. Tom set the ledger down. "We're okay," he told the house softly. "We're still here." The hum settled, just a little. By afternoon, the temperature dropped even harder. A pale crust of ice formed around the edges of the lake. Bare branches rattled in the wind. Eli's nose had gone pink and raw, and his hands felt colder than they should have, even by the fire. "Gloves," Tom said, digging through their small pile of belongings. "Where are your gloves?" "Wet," Eli mumbled, hugging himself tighter. They froze a little. Tom crouched in front of him. "Let me see your hands." Eli held them out. They were colder than the air. Too cold. Something old and ugly coiled behind Tom's ribs. Fear had a pattern in him now. He knew how it started. It started in his fingertips, then his jaw, then his throat. He got up fast and threw another armful of wood into the fireplace. The flames jumped and spat. He dragged over the blankets. He wrapped Eli up and pulled him close against his chest, rubbing the boy's hands between his own to warm them. "Better?" he asked. "Hmm?" Eli said, but his voice sounded far away. "Just tired." Tom pressed the back of his hand to Eli's forehead. Too warm. Too fast. No, he thought. No, not out here. Not like this. He'd gotten used to bad luck. He'd learned to work around it. He could fix roofs with scrap tin and seal drafts with old towels and talk his way down from people who treated him like trash. He could not fight fever. Not alone. Not without help. He swallowed hard. "Listen," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "You let me know if you start feeling worse. Right away, okay? No being tough." Eli nodded, eyes heavy. "I'm okay," he whispered. Tom didn't believe that. He didn't even pretend to. Hours passed slow. Outside, the wind dragged dry snow across the porch and made the boards groan. Inside, the fire burned too fast. Tom fed it anyway. He didn't care. Warmth first, wood later. The air felt wrong. His son's breathing sounded too tight. "Stay awake, buddy," he murmured. "Hey, you gotta stay awake for me." Eli's eyelids fluttered. "Mup," he mumbled. "Me here." Then he sagged, boneless, against Tom's chest, and that was the moment Tom broke. His voice cracked, and he didn't care who heard. He didn't care if no one did. "Please," he whispered, staring at the stone hearth. "Please, please, please don't take him from me." The hum he'd felt all these days, the steady low living sound beneath the floor, changed, fast. The air in the room shifted like the pressure before a storm. The stone around the fireplace vibrated in a way he could feel through his knees, through his ribs, through his teeth. A faint blue light pulsed under the hearth, soft at first, then brighter, spilling out from between the old stones like light leaking through cupped fingers. Tom froze. He didn't breathe. Eli didn't move. The blue wasn't the wild crack of lightning. It wasn't a flame. It wasn't fire at all. It was softer. Alive, but gentle. It pulsed in intervals, on, off, on again, with a regular rhythm. Tom realized after a few cycles that it wasn't random. It was counting. A beat, a pulse, 27 seconds apart. He didn't know how he knew it was 27. He just knew. He could feel each space, like time itself was being measured in the floor. Eli stirred in his arms, blinking up through fever-glazed eyes. The blue light reflected on his skin, calm and cool. His breathing, which had been shallow and fast, eased. The tightness in his chest loosened. The heat rolling off his forehead began to fall. Tom pressed his forehead against his son's hair and let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a prayer, but lived in the space between both. "It's okay," Eli whispered, almost asleep. "It's helping." Tom lifted his head and stared at him. "How do you know that?" Eli's eyes were half closed. "It told me." Tom swallowed. "What did it tell you?" "That we're not alone here." Tom looked back at the hearth. The crack beneath the stones had widened just slightly, like something had opened an eyelid. Soft blue light moved under the surface, running along veins in the rock like water does in roots. For a moment, just a moment, he could swear he heard something in it. Not words, not a voice, something like a lullaby without notes. The hum that had filled the house since the first night was no longer a background presence. It was full now. It sank into the floor, into the table, into his spine. It layered around them like a second blanket. Protective. Alive. He held Eli and listened as the light continued pulsing every 27 seconds, steady as a promise. After a long time, Tom didn't know how long, Eli's breathing smoothed out into true sleep. No more shivering. No more heat rolling off him like fire. No more strained little whimpers. Just rest. Real rest. The kind a kid should have every night of his life. Tom sat there in front of the hearth for nearly an hour without moving. He didn't trust his own legs. He didn't trust his voice. He didn't trust anything except the small rise and fall of Eli's shoulders. Only then did he notice something else. Thin, pale mist had begun to collect near the base of the hearth, rising slowly from the glowing crack. Not smoke, not steam. It didn't smell like burning. It didn't smell like anything he knew. It drifted and curled, then condensed into small beads on the stone, beads that glimmered faintly with that same blue light. Careful not to wake Eli, Tom reached out and touched one. Heat kissed his fingertip, not hot like fire, warm like skin, like someone holding your hand. He swallowed. "What are you?" he whispered. The hum softened, as if answering, then settled again into that patient rhythm. When Eli finally woke, hours later, he sat up, rubbed his eyes, and yawned. "Hey," Tom said softly. "Hey, buddy, you with me?" Eli blinked at him. "Are you crying?" Tom cleared his throat. "No." Eli smiled, small and sleepy. "Okay." Tom pressed a hand to his son's forehead. The fever was gone. Just gone. Like it had burned itself out and taken the fear with it. "How do you feel?" Tom asked. "Hungry," Eli said. Tom laughed, then covered his face with one shaking hand because his body had to let it out somewhere. Relief ran through him in a wave so strong it left him shaking. "Okay," he managed. "Yeah, hungry's good. Hungry I can work with." Eli scooted closer to the crack in the hearth where the light had faded to a quiet glow. "Thank you," he whispered to it. Tom stared. "You're talking to the floor now?" he said. "It's not the floor," Eli replied simply. "It's the house." Tom sat back. "And what did it say?" Eli looked at him with absolute certainty. It said, "Thank you for believing it wasn't broken." The words landed hard. Tom felt them move through him. He left his hand on the warm stone a long time after Eli wandered off to dig for something to eat. "Thank you for believing it wasn't broken." No one had thanked him for that before. Not the landlords who kicked them out. Not the people who told him to keep his kid quiet. Not the cashier who wouldn't meet his eyes when he paid in change. No one had ever looked at him or his son and said, in any way, "You're not broken." Now a house had. He didn't know what to do with that. By the next morning, the crack in the hearth had changed again. What had been a narrow line was now just a little wider, and there was something new inside it. Something pale, something alive. At first, Tom thought it was a weed, but weeds don't grow through stone in the dead of winter. It was a thin shoot, no thicker than a matchstick, pushing up from inside the warm, glowing seam, green, bright, impossible. Eli crouched in front of it, reverent. "It's growing," he whispered. Tom stared. "Inside the house?" "Uh-huh. That's not how that works," Tom said. Eli looked up at him. It is now. The hum deepened. Tom let out a quiet breath, the closest thing to a laugh he could manage. "Okay," he said. "Okay. Then we're going to make sure it doesn't get stepped on." He found a handful of smooth stones from Eli's lake piles and built a ring around the little sprout. Not too tight. Just enough to say this matters. Just enough to say this is safe. When he was done, he sat back on his heels and rubbed a hand over his face. Winter pressed hard against the windows. Wind rattled the warped frames. Ice crawled farther across the lake, turning the edges pale. And yet inside, in the center of that old stone house, something warm and alive had pushed up through the rock. Tom had been a man of practical things his whole life. Bolts, patches, jacks, socket wrenches, problems you can lift. But this wasn't repair. This was something else. This was proof. He picked up May's ledger, flipped past the pages where she'd helped him run numbers, and started writing on the back. Not money, not supplies, something truer. Day 19. Temperature outside below freezing. Eli fever, then healed. Blue light under hearth. Pulse steady, 27 seconds apart. Warmth never dropped. New growth in floor. He stared at what he had written. He didn't know why the details mattered. He just knew they did. He'd never kept a record of anything in his life except miles on a truck and parts on an invoice. Now he was documenting a heartbeat in the floor. That night, the lake froze almost all the way across. The air outside turned so still that sound carried differently, sharper, like glass. The house creaked softly as it settled against the cold. And yet Tom noticed something else, something he couldn't ignore anymore. The cold never quite reached them. It reached the windows. It reached the door. It reached his hands and face and bones and stayed there, aching and sharp. But it never touched Eli in his sleep. Never touched the circle of stones around the sprout. Never touched the base of the hearth, which still glowed so faintly blue it looked like moonlight living inside rock. Tom lay awake long after Eli had drifted off, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum beneath the floor and the faint pulse of light below the stone. He understood something then. This wasn't luck. This wasn't an accident. This house had not just sheltered them, it had chosen them. And now, whether he was ready or not, he knew exactly what that meant. He owed it back. He whispered into the dark, voice low but steady, "We're not leaving." The hum answered, deep and slow and certain, settling around him like a promise. Outside, wind scraped across ice and pine. Inside, Lake Hollow breathed. When the thaw came, it came slow, like the world itself was waking from a dream it didn't want to leave. The ice on Lake Hollow cracked in long, echoing sighs, and the first water to surface glimmered blue, like it remembered what had slept beneath it. Inside the stone house, spring revealed what winter had protected. The small green sprout by the hearth had grown taller, its stem thicker, its leaves soft and trembling in the morning light. Roots pushed gently between the cracks in the stone, curling into the warm earth beneath the floor. Tom sat by the fire with a mug of weak coffee, watching the tree as if it might start speaking. It was nearly 2 feet tall now, alive, healthy, impossible. The hum beneath the floor had deepened, no longer a whisper, but a steady pulse that moved through the air like breath. Eli came running from the porch, his boots muddy, his cheeks flushed. "Dad, the ice is gone. The lake's moving again." Tom smiled. "You sound like that's news." "It is. It means it's happy again." Eli paused, then added softly, "Like us." Tom didn't answer right away. He just nodded and looked at the hearth. Yeah, kid, like us. That afternoon, May Caldwell's old pickup rattled across the bridge, a trail of dust chasing her tailgate. She climbed the porch steps with a box in her arms, seed packets, nails, 2 cans of paint, and a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. You weren't kidding about fixing this place, she said, setting the box down. Then her eyes caught the tree. Lord, Tom, that's growing out of stone. Tom wiped his hands on his jeans. I stopped asking how a while ago. May stepped closer, tracing the outline of the roots with her gaze. It's beautiful, she whispered. Maybe kindness really does find its own soil. Tom chuckled quietly. That's what I keep telling Eli. May smiled, her eyes glistening. You know, I came up here today to remind you about your payment plan with the county, but I think they'd forgive anything if they saw this. Tom looked toward the lake. Forgiveness isn't what we need anymore. Just a fair chance. May nodded slowly. Then you already earned it. She touched his shoulder, squeezed gently, then left with the same quiet strength she always carried. Evening fell soft over the water, painting the lake in silver and rose. Tom sat on the steps while Eli fed small sticks into the fire. The air smelled of pine, ash, and something else, sweet and metallic, like rain before it touches ground. The hum beneath the floor grew faintly louder, then headlights appeared across the bridge. Tom's chest tightened. He knew that truck. Grant Ellison stepped out, papers clutched in one hand, a county seal stamped in red across the top. His usual polished calm was gone. He looked pale, tense. The county wants to reevaluate this land, Grant said without preamble. Something about unexplained geothermal readings under the lake. His gaze flicked toward the house. They want to dig, Tom. Drill, test, study. Tom rose slowly. And you came here, why? Grant hesitated, his voice lower now. Because they're sending a team. And when they find whatever this is, he gestured toward the glowing hearth, they'll claim it, they'll take it apart. Tom looked past him, to the lake and the faint shimmer moving just beneath the surface. You can't study a miracle by cutting it open, he said. Grant swallowed. You could lose everything. Tom stepped closer. We already lost everything once. This time we built something from faith. That's harder to take. Behind him, the house began to hum, low and resonant, like the sound of the earth itself shifting its weight. The windows glowed faint blue. The air thickened, pressing gently against their skin. Grant took an involuntary step back. His papers fluttered out of his hand, scattered by a sudden wind that hadn't existed a moment ago. The hum deepened. It wasn't threatening. It was protective. Tom spoke softly, but his voice carried. You need to leave, Mr. Ellison. Grant nodded shakily. Yeah, I think I do. He turned, climbed into his truck, and drove off without another word. The wind died. The hum softened again. Tom exhaled, long and slow. Thank you, he said into the quiet. From the hearth, the faint blue light brightened once, then faded back to its usual glow. That night, Tom dreamed of the man from the old photograph. The same coat, the same gentle smile. They stood together by the lake, watching its surface ripple under the moonlight. It doesn't belong to us, the man said. We belong to it. When Tom woke, the room was silent except for the faint heartbeat under the floor. Eli was asleep beside him, one hand resting on the trunk of the small tree as if listening. Outside, morning light spilled through the windows, golden and forgiving. Weeks passed. The county's surveyors came once, but never returned. The road washed out in a spring flood, and Lake Hollow fell off the map again. Life found its rhythm, Eli's laughter, May's visits, the hum beneath the floor. Sometimes travelers appeared, drawn by rumors of a blue-lit house that never grew cold. Tom always let them in. He never asked for money. "You can't sell peace," he told them. "You can only live inside it." Each guest left something behind: a coin, a book, a story, and the house accepted every gift with quiet grace. Years slipped by, gentle and full. The tree by the hearth reached the ceiling. Its leaves glowed faintly at night, whispering against the stone when the wind passed outside. One evening, Eli, now taller, stronger, his boyhood tucked behind his eyes, asked, "Dad, do you think the house will remember us when we're gone?" Tom looked at the tree, the lake, the blue shimmer pulsing beneath the floor. "I think it already does." Eli smiled. "Then we should leave it something to remember." He walked to the hearth, took the old photograph, the one with the message on the back, and placed it gently at the base of the tree. "Thank you," he whispered. The house answered with a soft hum, deep and steady, like a heartbeat learning joy again. Years later, long after footsteps faded from the porch and voices became memory, the house at Lake Hollow still stood, half stone, half heart, rooted in kindness. On calm nights, travelers said they saw its windows, glowing blue, heard a faint rhythm under the floor, one pulse every 27 seconds, and if they stayed long enough, they swore they could feel it too, the warmth of something alive beneath the earth, holding them gently, whispering through the walls. It remembers kindness. $20 house didn't just give them shelter. It gave them life, hope, and a home that remembered kindness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who believes in miracles. Tell us in the comments, would you live in a house like this?